The 2026 Formula One season has barely started, and Mercedes may already be under investigation. The first race of the year just ended in Melbourne. George Russell won. Kimi Antonelli finished second. A perfect Mercedes won too. But only hours after the checkered flag, rival teams began analyzing the race data, and what they found has triggered serious questions inside the paddock. Acceleration traces, hybrid deployment patterns, engine performance numbers. According to several analysts, the Mercedes power unit may have shown an advantage close to 30 horsepower compared to some rivals. And that is exactly why teams have reportedly started asking the FIA to take a closer look at what Mercedes brought to the Australian Grand Prix. Because if the data is correct, the W17 might not just be fast. It might be exploiting something hidden inside the brand new 2026 regulations. Ferrari drivers already admitted they were nowhere near the Mercedes pace in Melbourne. Red Bull finished more than 50 seconds behind the winner. And now the biggest question in Formula One is no longer who won the race. The real question is this: did Mercedes simply build the best car of the new era? Or did they discover something inside the rules that the rest of the grid completely missed? Because if the FIA investigation expands after the evidence from Australia, the first race of the 2026 season may have already started the biggest technical controversy of the entire championship. Subscribe to the channel, because what happens next could change the entire season. The 2026 Formula One season officially began in Melbourne. After months of preparation, testing, and speculation, the teams finally arrived at Albert Park for the first real test of the new era. New regulations, new power units, a completely different balance between electrical energy and combustion power. Every team believed they had understood the rules. But the first race of a new generation of cars always reveals the truth very quickly. And from the very first practice session, something about the Mercedes looked different. George Russell immediately appeared near the top of the timing screens. The car looked calm through the corners, stable under braking, and most importantly, incredibly smooth when accelerating out of slow turns. At first, other teams assumed Mercedes might simply be running a lighter fuel load during practice. That explanation is common in Formula One. Teams often hide their real performance until qualifying. But that theory began to fall apart during the final practice session. Russell delivered a lap that immediately caught attention across the paddock. More than 6/10 faster than the closest Ferrari. In modern Formula One, a gap like that during practice is already significant. But the real moment of truth arrived the next day. March 7th. Qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix. This is when every team finally removes the limits. Maximum power modes. Maximum electrical deployment. Everything the car can deliver in a single lap. And when Russell pushed the Mercedes to the limit, the W17 suddenly looked even stronger. Through the medium-speed corners of Albert Park, the car rotated perfectly. Through the traction zones, it accelerated earlier than almost every other car on the grid. Then the timing screen confirmed what many engineers were already starting to suspect. Pole position. 1 minute 18 seconds and 518 thousandths. But the next result made the message even clearer. Second place. Kimi Antonelli. Another Mercedes. A complete front row lockout for the team. And what made Antonelli's performance even more remarkable was what had happened only hours earlier. During the final practice session, the young Italian had suffered a heavy crash exiting turn 2. The rear of the car snapped violently. The Mercedes hit the barriers hard. For a moment, it looked like his weekend might be over before qualifying even began. But the mechanics rebuilt the car in time. And Antonelli responded with an impressive lap that secured second place on the grid. Inside the paddock, that front row lockout immediately raised eyebrows. Ferrari had expected to fight for pole. Red Bull had hoped to be closer. But the gap to the Mercedes was larger than many people anticipated. Charles Leclerc later admitted something very direct after qualifying. Ferrari was simply nowhere near the pace of the Mercedes in Melbourne. And according to him, the advantage appeared to come primarily from the engine. A statement like that is extremely unusual in Formula One. Drivers rarely admit such a large performance difference publicly. But the numbers from qualifying made the situation impossible to ignore. Still, qualifying pace is only half the story. Because the real test of any Formula One car comes on Sunday. Race conditions, fuel loads, tire management, energy deployment across long stints. And when the lights went out for the Australian Grand Prix, the race immediately began to reveal just how strong the Mercedes package really was. When the lights finally went out in Melbourne, the race immediately became chaotic. Both Mercedes drivers had done everything right in qualifying. Front row, clean side of the grid, perfect opportunity to control the race from the start. But the launch did not go according to plan. George Russell reacted a fraction too slowly. Kimi Antonelli struggled even more with traction. And that single moment opened the door for Ferrari. Charles Leclerc launched perfectly. By the time the cars reached the first corner, the Ferrari was already in front. For a brief moment, the entire race seemed to flip. Russell suddenly found himself trapped between the two Ferraris. Leclerc ahead, Lewis Hamilton closing in behind. And the opening laps quickly turned into one of the most intense battles of the race. The new 2026 regulations have changed how drivers attack and defend. The hybrid systems now deliver power in aggressive bursts. Drivers can activate a special overtake mode that releases extra electrical energy. But there is a price. Every time a driver uses that extra deployment, the battery drains faster. Which means the car becomes vulnerable a few seconds later. Russell experienced that immediately. Each time he activated the attack mode to challenge Leclerc, the Mercedes surged forward with incredible acceleration. But once the battery level dropped, the Ferrari could fight back. Overtake. Counterattack. Another attempt. For several laps, the lead of the Australian Grand Prix changed hands repeatedly. It was exactly the kind of fight Formula One hoped to see under the new rules. But then the race produced the moment that quietly changed everything. A Red Bull suddenly slowed on track with a mechanical problem. The car pulled to the side of the circuit. Race control immediately deployed the virtual safety car. At first, it looked like just another neutralization. But inside the Mercedes garage, the reaction was instant. Both Russell and Antonelli were called into the pits at the exact same moment. A perfectly synchronized double pit stop. Fresh tires. Minimal time lost under the neutralized conditions. Ferrari made a different decision. They stayed out on track. Their strategy was based on probability. Albert Park often produces multiple safety cars. They believed another interruption would appear later in the race. But that gamble carried enormous risk. And within seconds, the entire race order changed. Russell rejoined the circuit with something every driver dreams about. Clean air. No traffic. No Ferrari blocking his pace. Just open track ahead. And that is when the true performance of the Mercedes W17 began to appear. Lap after lap, Russell began controlling the pace from the front. Not pushing aggressively. Not taking unnecessary risks. Simply managing the gap behind him. Which is often the clearest sign of a dominant car. Because when a driver can control the race without driving on the limit, it means the performance advantage is real. Meanwhile, Kimi Antonelli had his own recovery mission unfolding behind him. After the poor start, the young Italian had dropped all the way down to 7th place. But slowly, lap after lap, he began climbing back through the field. And during those overtakes, one particular detail started to appear again and again. Every time the Mercedes exited a slow corner, it accelerated slightly earlier than the cars around it. Not dramatically faster, but consistently faster. Corner after corner. Lap after lap. By the middle phase of the race, Antonelli was already fighting for the podium again. And when the second virtual safety car appeared later in the Grand Prix, Ferrari once again decided to stay out. Mercedes remained calm. They stuck to their strategy. And when Ferrari finally made their pit stops later in the race, the gap had already grown too large. Russell controlled the race from the front. Antonelli secured second place behind him. A perfect 1-2 finish for Mercedes in the very first race of the 2026 season. On the surface, it looked like a flawless weekend for the team. Pole position. Race victory. A dominant performance from both drivers. But once the checkered flag fell, something else started happening inside the paddock. Because engineers from rival teams immediately began analyzing the race telemetry. And the numbers coming out of Melbourne revealed something that would soon create enormous tension across Formula One. But the real tension in Melbourne did not appear during the race. It appeared after the race ended. When the garages closed. When the engineers opened their laptops. When the data from the Grand Prix finally started being analyzed. Because every Formula One team studies the telemetry from every session. Not only their own data. They also analyze patterns from rivals. Acceleration traces. Energy deployment cycles. Throttle response. Battery discharge rates. Thousands of data points from every lap of the race. And when engineers began comparing those numbers from the Australian Grand Prix, something unusual began to appear in the Mercedes data. Not one single anomaly. A repeated pattern. Every time the Mercedes exited a slow corner, the car seemed to accelerate slightly earlier than the others. Not dramatically faster, but consistently faster. Corner after corner. Lap after lap. In Formula One, that kind of consistency usually means something important is happening under the surface. Because the new 2026 regulations changed the entire philosophy of the power units. Less reliance on pure combustion power. Much more reliance on electrical deployment, energy recovery, battery management, and most importantly, timing. Timing of when that electrical power is released during the lap. If a team releases that energy too early, the battery drains quickly. If they release it too late, the driver loses acceleration exactly when it matters most. Most teams are still learning how to balance that system. But Mercedes looked completely comfortable with it from the very first race. And that detail is exactly what has now started the debate across the paddock. Because some engineers believe the advantage may come from a very clever interpretation of the new power unit regulations. Not necessarily more power, but better control of how that power is delivered. Albert Park exposed that advantage perfectly. Short acceleration zones, frequent traction points, rapid transitions between braking and throttle. Under those conditions, the Mercedes W17 looked incredibly efficient. Some analysts inside the paddock now believe the Mercedes power unit could have an advantage close to 30 horsepower compared to certain rivals. 30 horsepower in modern Formula One is enormous. That difference changes everything. Acceleration, defensive capability, tire management. It even affects how aggressively drivers can push during a race. But here is where the story becomes even more complicated. Because some teams believe the advantage may not come purely from raw engine power. Instead, they suspect something related to compression ratios and hybrid deployment management inside the new regulations. In other words, a possible gray area in the rules. Nothing illegal has been proven. No official accusation has been made. But when several teams begin asking similar technical questions, the FIA usually starts paying attention. And that is exactly what is beginning to happen after the Australian Grand Prix. According to people inside the paddock, teams have started requesting technical clarifications regarding certain aspects of the Mercedes power unit, which means the governing body may now examine the system more closely.